What's up, everyone? It's your girl, Fantastic Frankey, the fanboy fighter. I am so excited to be here for a Sci-Fi Sword and Sorcery producing epic worlds for TV and film, the panel here at VirtuousCon. We have one of the most decked out, incredible panels I have ever had the pleasure to be on, and I'm so excited to get into it. I want to thank everyone for coming, and I want to remind everyone, which I'll remind throughout the panel, that if you have any questions for our panelists, please put it in the question and answer box. I know we are inclined to put it in the chat box, but I want to make sure that we get to it when we're at the end. I also want to remind you that we have enabled closed captioning. So if you do need it, if you have things in the background or if you're a sub watcher and you just love watching closed captions, you have the ability to do so as well. Now, I don't want to keep everyone in here with the intro. We're going to get started. And I'm going to invite our panelists who are incredible. So I'm going to start off with Ihuoma Ofordire. Let's get her up here. And while we're waiting for her to get joined, I'm going to read her bio because it's incredible. Okay, there we go. Hi, Ihuoma. Ihuoma is a writer and producer, director, actress, known for her work on the ongoing FX drama Snowfall with Fine Idris, if you guys all know, and HBO Emmy award-winning period sci-fi Lovecraft Country, which was executive produced by J.J. Abrams and Jordan Peele. Ofordire shared in Writers Guild of America's nomination for Lovecraft Country, winning widespread acclaim for the most lauded 8th episode of the series Jigaboo, which is insane and terrifying, which examined the aftermath of the infamous Emmett Till murder in the 1950s Mississippi and the legacy of racist stereotype. She also co-wrote the series finale, Full Circle, with the creator Misha Green. And prior to her triumph of Lovecraft, Ofordire created, penned, and starred in the indie series Life, Love, and Hollywood. She also produced, directed, and starred in her 2014 short film, Furtive. Am I saying that correctly? Yay. We were just talking about it. I could never say anything right, so.
You got my name right, so you did good.
Because we practice, I'm very excited. So welcome.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Next up, we have Kristin Iris Johnson. Kristin was born in Chicago, Illinois. She is a film producer, screenwriter, and the VP of Development and Production at Megamind Media. Insane. Having a lifelong gift for storytelling, Kristin attended Columbia College Chicago, where she studied both film, video, and fiction writing before getting her BA in fiction writing in 2008. She is a creator and writer of the hit supernatural TV series Wicked City, starring Vanessa Bell Calloway, writer of the upcoming feature film Kiss of Death, and she also produced the featured film Trophy Wife in 2022. And she's the producer of the feature films The Sound of Christmas, The Deadly Giveaway, and Holiday Heartbreak, and The Available Wife, which is co-produced by two very important anthology series on BET. Let's give it up for Kristin. Welcome. I told y'all this is stacked, y'all. I told you. Next up is Yetide Badaki. Yetide is a Nigerian American actress, writer, producer, and director, best known for portraying the goddess Belquis on the critically acclaimed Starz series American Gods. She is also slated to star as Queen Meru in Zack Snyder and Jay Olivia's upcoming Army of the Dead, Las Vegas. And she plays Veronica, mother to the, I cannot say this name, Adika Kumbo. Is that correct? Yay! I'm learning so much today already. I love it. Brothers in the Disney film Rise, and is attached star to the role Queen Nzinga. Yes. for Stars Lionsgate, where she is executive producer alongside M. Abudu, Curtis, 50 Cent Jackson, and Stephen DeKnight. And she holds an MFA in theater from Illinois State University. Welcome. I hope everyone is feeling the energy I am, because like just reading the bio is like insane. Next up, we have Serena M. Lee. Serena was born and raised in Maryland. She went to the University of Tampa and studied computer graphics and minored in dance and theater, okay? Although she spent most of her time after college working as a graphic designer, she didn't feel like that was her true passion. She decided to go back to school and studying visual communication with the focus on digital cinema at Bowie State University. While she was in school, she worked on several films and was introduced to Tressa Azriel Smallwood, the owner of Megamind Media, and started studying screenwriting in depth. She enjoys working as second assistant camerawoman and was inspired to start a business in craft service. She's also the owner of Deloitte Studios, LLC, a multimedia studio specializing in short film development, design, and set photography. As part of her multimedia firm, she writes scripts, especially enjoys writing horror and supernatural thrillers. Serena is also the co-owner of Sip and Dip Crafty. Very nice. A growing craft services company committed to providing cast and crews with snacks, drinks, and catering. So Serena, you are writing and then providing everybody with food. I love to see it. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
And then finally, we have Sebastian Jones. Sebastian is the owner and president of Stranger Comics. He's been involved in entertainment since early age in England. And after having left for America at 18 years old, he founded the critically acclaimed MVP Records, globally releasing 25 albums over several years that included such artists as James Brown, Marvin Gaye, and Billie Holiday, with a client list including EMI, Capitol, Sony, WB, BMG, and Universal. He transitioned from music to movies when he collaborated with filmmakers, the Polish Brothers, as well as starring in a score of national commercials. So he's a model and a writer, y'all. Jones wrote and directed the comedy pilot Cast Off, starring Scott McNairy, and he transitioned to feature writing and adapted several of his stories into comics and children's books. And that's when he founded Stranger Comics and the children division Stranger Kids. Johns now spends his time publishing, writing, and teaching the art of the story and how to turn an idea from concept to creation. If you guys have ever been at a con, you've seen Sebastian there, and he is so full of pride and joy, and he's all about his world, Niobe. So I'm so excited to be here. Thank you all. Look, shameless plug. I love it. And welcome to this panel. So we're going to be discussing world building in the fantasy realm, and then we're going to move into everyone's experiences in the fantasy realm and Black fantasy. So we're going to start off light. So tell me, what is the first steps of building a fantasy world? Because it's so in depth and there's so many moving parts to it, and it's just something I've always been curious about.
I would say for me, the first thing is the mythology. I have to understand how the world works. What are the rules of the world? So once I understand the mythology, and then I think I go into how does it look and how does it feel? What's the tone of it? Is it dark? Is it light? Is it scary? So I think those are the two methods of how I go into world building.
Exactly. And there's always that inception moment, where something inspires you, something, I know for me, and we'll probably talk about this quite a bit since Sebastian is here, since we're doing Niger Vamp together. But that was one where I was working in Greece on the Rise film. And for some reason, I'm walking around looking at all these ancient monuments. I'm like, okay, yeah. And why don't we have Nigerian vampires? Just popped into my head. And there it was. And, you know, everything that you just spoke about, Ihuoma, is what Sebastian and I have been dealing with now, is, you know, further filling in all the rules of how that world works, and, you know, how you have the vampires and where have they been, and all of these different elements. But it's always that first moment for me that's really exciting, of being, you know, a sci-fi and fantasy fan as well, wanting to see something that that I have maybe not seen yet before, and then having the opportunity to try and build that space.
I agree. I think the inception point, there's always like something like an idea that drops in my head, or what about this? When Serena and I started with Wicked City, I was like, okay, well, I want to do something different. And I had the idea of Black witches. And that was like as far as I got. I was like, okay, but what about Black witches? And so I brought Serena in, and we started conceptualizing, you know, it kind of in tandem was like, who are our characters? Like, who's our main character? And then what's this world? So there was a little bit of both, because I'm really big on character development. So a lot of times I'll have like an idea or a concept, and then it's okay, but who's living this? Whose story is it? And then when I have a little bit about that person, I'm like, okay, well, what's the rest of the world? So whether it is like a completely fantasy made up world, or like Wicked City is set in Atlanta, you know, so it's set in our world, but there's like a magical element to it. Is like, okay, now what are the rules? What are the rules of magic? What are the dynamics? What are like the hierarchies? What's the society like? And then how are these people navigating in that space? And what does that look like?
Awesome. Seb, you...
I was going to go in order.
In order. Okay.
It's okay. I agree with what Kristin. We worked on that together, and just developing that world it took some time. It takes a lot of time to really sit, and you have a lot of, you know, who's doing this, and there were a lot of grids, and to work out everything to make sure things go the way they're supposed to go.
Yeah, I think for me, there's no right or wrong entry into fantasy. People go, do you start with the world, the group, or the character? The world being, let's say, Middle Earth, the group being the elves, the character being Legolas, right? And I just say yes. So I think everyone kind of finds their own journey into the world that they're creating. For me, it was the character, essentially Niobe. And I was a young boy at the time. I was a teenager, some years ago. And essentially, I was kind of getting in a lot of fist fights and getting bullied a lot. And in the boarding school I was at, and essentially I was creating a character that could take on my own inhibitions and vulnerabilities, but also my wrath. And as that was happening, I started to build a world around her. And as I grew, she grew with me. So I think when people, and then I started writing poems about girls I liked, and then that somehow I would imagine the characters that would speak those poems to these people, and then what did they look like and what did they sound like, and then build towns around them. And then as that was happening, then the gods started to form and the mythos started to happen. And so I just think there's no right or wrong entry. It's whatever feels the most personal. But I also agree that if you don't fall in love with the character, the world behind you means nothing.
I love that. How did you all get into fantasy? Because it's so obscure for Black people in general to get into fantasy. And not only are you all into it, you're creating it. So I would love to know, where did the love of fantasy and Black fantasy come from?
Children's books. Like ever since I was a kid, like everybody reads, you know, like every children's book, there's like, it's always animals. Like that's kind of fantastical, animals doing things. And so, you know, I grew up reading stories, reading different fantasy stories, even like from picture books, you know? And so that I always had a love of fantasy. I always had a love of science fiction. And as I got older and started realizing like, I'm not seeing myself in this. And Octavia Butler really probably changed the game for me as a writer and as a reader, because I didn't see Black characters in the center. It was like your Lord of the Rings, and they're all white pretty much. You know, so reading Octavia Butler just like completely cracked my mind open and my creativity open and just changed me as a writer and as a creative. And I was like, I want more of this and I want to make more of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to piggyback off of the Octavia Butler. I think just reading her and the way that she created these characters. And I think also too, it's like you saw yourself in the pages of her books. And there was just like, your imagination was unlocked by reading her. So I would have to say Octavia Butler. Dawn, I love that book. Like it transformed just my outlook on just writing in general.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up children's books, and because for me, yeah, it does go back as far as childhood. You know, hearing my parents, the elders, telling stories, talking about the gods, and then that had me deeply interested in the similarities I was hearing with these gods and the Norse gods and the Greek gods, and then I jumped into, yes, obviously Ray Bradbury and the whole Lord of the Rings and all, Stephen King and all of that. But everybody has brought up Octavia Butler. It feels like we all had that moment. For me as Wild Seed, and just being blown away by the scope of storytelling. But again, that thing of specifically being able to see myself in that world. And since then, there's also Nnedi Okorafor and the stuff that she's doing with African futurism and all of that. And that's another thing that it looks like we'll be collaborating on something soon. And as I get to be a part of creating worlds, all of these histories, these mythos, these stories, these incredible creators have inspired a further journey into the world building, as you say.
I think for me, I kind of always already lived in my own fantasy world anyway. I was like a loner kind of and weird, very different from everyone else. So I always made up my own worlds to live in already as a child. And so I just kept doing it. And I was lucky to have a parent that allowed me to live in that fantasy world. So I think that's kind of what I've never grown out of it. So I'm still in there. So, that's kind of how I do it.
I think for me, it was, I was just at that kind of that right age where I was smashed with all sorts of different types of inspirations and influences, in those kind of formative years. And a lot of it came actually through cinema and music. And so I was really started heavily getting into, as a teenager, getting into Yojimbo and Seven Samurai and a lot of those kind of Kurosawa movies, and then the spaghetti westerns. And at the same time, I was reading Lord of the Rings and reading Jack Kirby and those types of comic, and the Marvel comics, and just kind of suddenly discovering Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy. But a lot of it comes from me, the sound. And I imagine, how does the sound of the world, how do you experience that through that? And how are the traditions of culture passed down from different cultures to different cultures? Those are kind of the things when I would watch certain types of cinema, ironically, not through books, essentially. And of course, some of the classics, that we all kind of mention. But I wanted to imagine, how do the people speak? What is the music, and what does it evoke? So that's really my jam.
I love that. I love that you all named Octavia Butler, because I feel like that's the first time I read a sci-fi or a fantasy book and I knew for sure the characters were Black. Have you guys ever assigned Blackness to a character? Like for me, it was Hermione. I was sure she was Black. I was shocked when Emma showed up on that screen. I was like, whoa, like she got a perm in the fourth book. Like it was, she was fighting for slave rights. Like it was all this thing.
Yeah,
but,
tracks.
right? She had a big bag. She was stuffing stuff in. I was like, come on, y'all, this is coded. But But are there any characters that you always saw as Black and then found out later they weren't, like via multimedia projects or anything like that? Oh, you guys are all thinking.
Oh, I don't know. Because the default is always white. Because that's what's always read, that's what's always in media. And I think when I was younger, I didn't necessarily care because I just love stories. And like when you're a kid, they're not Black, they're not white, they're just like, it's a piglet, it's like, it's a chicken, you know, whatever. But I think when I first read The Fledgling, and the other thing is, when I read The Fledgling, I was like, okay, is this like another Black story about like slavery or something? Like, you know, because that's always what we get exposed to in school, is these oppressive stories, even if they're not fantasy, these oppressive Black stories, and never anything that's just like, oh, like here's a coming of age about this like Black girl or something, you know? So I read The Fledgling and I was like, I think thinking back, I'm like, oh, that was like probably the first moment where it's like, is this what white people feel like all the time when they like read themselves on the page? Like, is this what this feels like? I'm like, I feel so seen. Like, I felt like I could have played her if I had just been a little bit younger. So I think it's like, it'll be the reverse. Like somebody will show up and I'm like, oh, they're Black. Oh, Black friend.
I love that. Kristin, you brought up a question I was going to ask later, but since we're here, let's go into it. So a lot of people are criticizing Black fantasy and saying it's too closely tied to Black trauma. But on the other hand, fantasy inherently is based around trauma, right? Like, why does a quest start? Things like that. What are your thoughts on Black trauma being shown in fantasy? Do you think there's room for both? Or I'd love to get the conversation going on that for sure.
I think there's room for both because, I mean, the biggest thing is like, you're going to write what you know. And so if you've had something in you that's traumatic and you're writing your characters or something, a lot of times for me, I feel like I'm a part of each character. So something from me is going to be a part of that. So if I've experienced trauma, that's going to be a part of what I write.
Or even if you've seen it or there's something about it that you want to speak on, like sometimes that'll come through. It doesn't mean it has to come through in everything. And it doesn't mean that every piece of, you know, fantasy or sci-fi literature or movie or TV has to have that. But I don't think that we should say, oh, it can't have this anymore at all, because like that is part of our experience. And we can also take that sometimes and spin it into something else and make something else out of it.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, we were very intentional in terms of Lovecraft Country, where, you know, you're surrounded by all this trauma in the 1950s. But we wanted to find a way that Black people were empowered by the end of the series. So I think it's also very important, while trauma is real, but what is the flip side? What is the healing process? What is the, how do you feel empowered despite all the things that are happening to you out of your control?
Right.
I think a lot of it is the intention of the story that you want to write, you know. So it depends on the character's journey that, you know, you want that character to experience, and then how does somebody see themselves reflected? Because you essentially want to put the reader experiencing the lens of the character, that, and then once they're planted and they're going on that same journey. As you know, Serena was saying earlier, I think for me, when I'm creating, a lot of each different character does represent a different kind of aspect of who I am, and whether it's personal experiences, current experiences, family life, and all those types of things, and some of that shit's traumatic. And then also playing from a, you know, I think you're going from the macro on the overall kind of aspect of what you're asking, Frank, as far as the generational trauma and those types of things. How much do you want that to essentially sit as an overall kind of macro, and then does that then distill into the micro of the characters and what they're experiencing, and what's the intention of that specific character and their personal journey, and how does it relate to the other characters that are also in the dance and to the reader. So I always come back to the character, and if it's intentional for that character to have that, and I love what Ihuoma was saying as far as then what is the solution, what is the redemption, the salvation, so we can also feel that sense of, peace and revelation.
I think that's something that I think it was Ihuoma that touched on this. The idea that perhaps we be more expansive than restrictive. So that, yes, that you will have some stories that, as in life, art reflects life. So there are some stories that will deal with issues of trauma. And in addition, we can have other stories that perhaps focus on something else. But the idea of taking away the ability to speak on something that obviously is a large part of our experience feels more restrictive. And, it's funny, I was just reading this article from NPR, and they were talking about storytellers and listeners, and how brainwaves start to synchronize. The more that a listener is understanding what is being told in the story, the more their brainwaves start to synchronize with the storyteller. And I think there's something really powerful there, especially in regards to speaking about trauma, speaking about it generationally, speaking about it on a macro scale of further imparting this much needed empathy and understanding of an experience. And in that way, I think stories are deeply important in the way that they deal with trauma.
Yeah, I think that's important to see the difference between what trauma porn is and using trauma and overcoming it. And I think you all do a great job, right? In Lovecraft Country, yeah, there is Emmett Till, there's a burning of Tulsa, there's things like that, but it's all about how the characters react to it. And I think that's a core of fantasy, right? But Frodo, or I forgot Lord of the Flies, but he's taking on the trauma, the generational trauma of Bilbo Baggins. Harry Potter is taking on the trauma from his parents. Like, I think that's very, very important, but it feels different because Black fantasy was we've seen so many slave stories before Black fantasy got highlighted. And so I think both are being connected. That being said, how do you go about kind of connecting historical elements or real life themes of being Black and connecting them to fantasy? Because all of you have done it so gracefully. And I'd really like to know what that process is like. Word.
I'm like, I'm not even sure how to answer that.
But you all do it. I've seen it. Yeah, got it down for sure.
I think I'm gonna start with character development, like how certain histories, like if I think about my main character, what's this person's personal history? How is that informed by like the generational history? How is that informed by like societal history and societal, I guess, conditioning around whatever that history is, the interplay of that. Because I think that as writers, there's, even in film, it's like you got 90 minutes or you got 120 minutes to like tell this story, maybe that long. But there's this whole life that the characters lived before that, and there's generations before them and ancestors before them, and all of those things impact those characters and how they showed up in this place in this time for this 90 minutes that you're watching them of the story. So we have to, for me, it helps me to understand that, and some of that discovery happens as I write and as I develop. But I would say probably coming from the character development of who is this person, what is their life, what is their history, and how is that informed by the world around them.
I'm kind of vague on the question again, but I have a feeling I know what you were asking. I would just say in relation, to my experience, and maybe this will answer a little bit, is everything has serious intention on on people's own personal journeys and how it relates to them in their immediate and their bigger world. So for me, being a mixed dude growing up, and then but not finding where I could essentially fit in, or I could fit in, but where did I belong? And then and having that war to wage, fitting in versus belonging. And so with Niobe, there is real intention. Like people go, oh, cool, she's got locks. Well, the reason why she has dreadlocks is because it's the last memory of her mother, and holding on to her in memory is holding on to her own mother and her mother's experience. So so that is why it's a desire to connect with her mother and then her ancestors and those types of things. So I think when you're creating the worlds and you want to really understand the importance of the ceremony of culture, rather than it coming across as it sometimes can be, where it's like, oh shit, this is a hashtag trending, let me quickly do this now, let me and no, no shade on folks that wanted to experience this this world and this life. But I think once you understand the idea of the ceremony of culture and the relationship from a character to the culture that they inhabit, then that has real sense of weight and gravitas. So then a reader has that real connective tissue of going, oh, I don't really know why I'm fully connecting to this character, but as Kristin was saying, they've lived lives that we've already kind of started to write for them. And also to have the understanding to allow us as writers to also evolve, because it's not, we get asked this question a lot, which is, do you build the world first? Which I think, Brandon, that's your first question. And it's like, I'm not dead yet. The world is growing. So the world I'm building is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so as I grow, my world is going to grow as well. And then you can collaborate with other writers and they can help grow your world. And I have no idea if that answered any questions whatsoever. But
it did. And it's interesting too, because in my head, I thought the world was built and then you just go from there.
Right.
Or you're
Never.
saying you all like build outward, right? You start on the core world and then you kind of expand out.
It's a big world out there,
Yeah.
Imagine the size of Earth, and then you're basically going, okay, what's the geological pattern in the Antarctica? I haven't got to that yet. It's a big world. And so whether you're building something story-wise and it's localized to Atlanta, to you're creating something that's set in the whole world that's current or 13th century, or Niger Vamp that I'm doing with Yetide, is that world is going to continue to blossom and grow in the real and the fantasy. And if you're doing a big fantasy world, then yeah, it's big.
Yeah. Does anyone ever take inspiration from like social media? I know a lot of people comment and talk about like specific worlds, and not just social media. Like if you meet someone specifically and they ask you about a part of a world you haven't built yet, have you ever like taken like, oh, that's a great idea, and kind of ran with it? Or do you just like, what's that process like?
I'll piggyback on it real quick and I'll shut up, so I've been talking.
No.
But that specific question is hilarious, because I do a live every Thursday on Instagram and now YouTube. But I asked that to the fans. I said, what do you want to see? And because currently Niobe and her existence is quite young as she's growing and growing, and they're like, so what's up? Is Niobe gonna, is she gonna get married? Is she, when's she gonna, like, we've seen her first kiss? Is she gonna, do the thing? Is she have kids? What are Niobe's kids like? And I'm like, oh, whoa, yeah, okay. Niobe having kids already? So now I'm like, well, what do you think? And then one of the fans said, well, she's half angel, half demon. Maybe she has twins, and one's evil and one's. I was like, oh, that's great. So I'm in a general social media trend. I never believe in writing for a trend, because trends are transient. You write what you want to write, and you write something to be timeless, not timely.
Yeah.
Timeless should always be timely.
Yes.
But yes. So thanks to that person, shout out. Yes, I'm writing Niobe's future and future kids, and then divorce, child support, it's a whole thing. No, I'm joking.
I think it's interesting that the first thing that people go to, especially with female characters, is about like domestic and like, what is she gonna have kids? Like, what? She's trying to save the world. You know what I mean? But that kind of goes into my next question. We're all people of color, and we're writing in a space that is very hostile towards us and really tries to pigeonhole us for the most part. How do you navigate in a space that wasn't made for us specifically? Yeah, Kristin, you're gonna go first, girl. I was thinking.
I mean, okay, I actually want to hold because this is bringing up a different question that I think you have.
Okay, yeah.
About like the criticism on our work versus others' work, and I want to save it for that.
Okay, so we'll let you go last, and we'll start with Ihuoma then.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? My mind is like all over. I'm looking at the pad. I'm like trying to focus.
It's a lot. And actually, you could compound both. I'll re-ask the question because after this, we'll go into the Q&A. But I was asking, how do you navigate a space that's basically very hostile towards us? And do you feel like Black fantasy is criticized harder than its peers?
The way I navigate the world, I think, is just trying as much as possible to be authentic to yourself in the story that you're telling. And I feel as though as long as it feels correct to you, despite whatever is being, critiqued or thrown back on you, I think it's just important to know why and being intentional with the characters and what you're creating in the world. Now, in terms of Black fantasy being more criticized, I think Black art in general is more criticized than all other, art forms. I just think there is just a level of, I'll just speak for myself. I mean, there's just a level of perfectionism, or it has to be perfect, or you can't make anything. I just think sometimes the bar is set really, really high for Black art, and there's not a lot of space for there to be different levels within Black art. Like, everything doesn't have to be excellent. Like, there's some things that just can be what it is. Like, everything doesn't have to be deep, everything doesn't have to be woke, everything doesn't have to be like, it could be whatever you want it to be. And it shouldn't be all this criteria of what Black art should or should not be.
Ihuoma has said it perfectly. I definitely feel like the art is under a microscope. Every move, every character, every lighting decision definitely feels like it's loaded. And like Ihuoma has said, I mean, there's two things to it. One, I personally tend to then funnel it back into the art. It is part of the experience. The characters definitely metabolize that. And two, again, as Ihuoma said, you just have to try and remain authentic, and that's what resonates. That's what people remember. That's what people identify with. And I think when you metabolize it into the work, people are able to understand that struggle a little bit as well within that space. So yes, I definitely think that the work is criticized more harshly in many ways. I definitely think that we're scrutinized a whole lot more. I also understand that it's harder for us to fail forward, but that all goes into the work.
I mean, Serena, I was going to see if you wanted to go, because I got some funny experiences in my life with doing Niobe, which is.
I think Chris and I have had some very interesting responses, especially when it comes to like, so, our show Wicked City is about Black witches, and we received a lot, of backlash, because it's like, oh my gosh, they're telling everyone to go and worship demons and all this stuff. And I was like, I just wanted to be in a fantasy world, you know. It's like, but those same people are the same people that will watch like Harry Potter and every other
Hocus Pocus.
Hocus Pocus, and they're like, oh my God, it's the best show ever. And I'm like, okay, but I just want to see me too. I like witch stuff and magic and everything. And everything that I write doesn't mean that I'm telling you all to go drop your religion and join the Satan cult. Like, it's not what I'm trying to say. I just want everyone to be like represented. And I think it's okay that we want to live in these same fantasy worlds that our counterparts live in, you know? And it was just so shocking to see how many people weren't even willing to give it a shot, you know, just off of what they thought something was, you know. It's like, how do you know? I never understand how people, like, how do you judge something without even giving it a chance? So that's my mini rant.
Yeah, we did get a good amount of religious backlash from Black people. I want to like our show is a Black show. It's on a Black network. I don't know how many white people are even watching it, but we did get before it even aired, a lot of like, if you watch this, you're gonna let demons in, and people would be like, if watching a show is gonna let demons in, you need to get right with God. Like, clapping back. I was like, I'm gonna leave it. One of our cast members was like, I love this for us because they're still going to be watching. So I think it was interesting. I wasn't really surprised. It was just like, really? You guys watch all these other shows by white people and you're not worried about demons coming in. You haven't even watched it. It's not even a show about demons. And what that makes me think of it is not just like the art getting criticized harder, but because our experience was in particular of Black people responding in that way, or like being like, oh, this could be better. It's like, yeah, anything could be better, right? Like, you know, I feel like there's a little bit of a sense of like, but we never have this, and you got a foot in the door and you didn't do it perfect, or you didn't do it this way, or you didn't do this thing that I wanted, because like they're gonna look at that. And it ties into this scarcity mindset that like, you're only going to get this much and you have to do it perfect so that everybody else can get a bite later. And the reality is like, everything's not going to be perfect. And we have to still, if you don't support your own people's work when it's not completely perfect or exactly the way you want it to be, because everybody's going to have a different view of it. If you don't support their work, we're not going to get more work out there. Mm-hmm. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but when we support each other, we create more pathways for more work to come out, for more money to come in from networks, from studios to put into this work so that you can do bigger and broader things with it. So support each other, you know, like, even if you're like, that's not for me, but like, I could see why it's for other people, you know, show up, show support, share it, bring other people to it. And that's where we get to start expanding what we can do. I also feel like that about the trauma. Honestly, now I think about it, the trauma and fantasy, and it being about Black trauma is like, but we get so little of it. Why is it got to be about trauma? And it's like, well, we can have more of it. We are creating more of it. Let's make more pathways for that and support the work that's out there so that we can have something, you know, so that we can have more of it.
Yeah, my experience is, I think that's I mean, pretty much said everything in a nutshell. My experience has been very extreme, from getting criticized that Niobe is nothing more than Lord of the Rings in blackface. And I'm like, you know, I saw that, you know, I've had seen them in a couple of chats, and that's from Black folks. And then I've been at a convention, and my booth has been torn down by, you know, white supremacy kind of dudes. Mm-hmm. So I think you can have these, and those are obviously the giant extremes. And then there's that immediate assumption that I think as soon as somebody sees something Black in fantasy, it's almost like that's the headline. Mm-hmm. That's the headline in the post. And then the person in the post doesn't, or the person reading the post doesn't then go, oh, I guess it's Black fantasy. Like, or is it fantasy that's Black? And let me read about the character and the story and go on their journey. So I think as soon as something is Black within a science fiction fantasy genre, before it even gets scrutinized, it's scrutinized in the headline.
Mm-hmm.
Because then there's an assumption I hear a lot, because I get this a lot, of like, oh, you're getting the success because it's Black and that's current and that's this, that, and the other. I'm like going, when we started Stranger Comics, it was because I shopped this idea around to the different publishers, and shout out to those guys, because 90% of them are vapid and hollow people, that they were like, oh, this would look good during Black History Month announcements.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's that automatic assumption that where is the depth of character and story, you know, within rather than just that headline. So it does get scrutinized. And I think for white people, I think there's this whole concept of a culture of identity crisis, where they go, well, wait, I got married to the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. This is mine, you know, and this is mine. I've got Star Wars, Lord of the Rings is my shit. You can't, you wait, you've got that, you're this and this. And then as soon as that kind of, starts butting up, it's just, things don't compute, and people start shutting down a little bit. And it's not pie, it's not, I think once folks, and it's fascinating to me because I love grabbing the unassuming fan at a convention. If they're wearing the certain red hats with the letters on, I come in and go, oh my God, you love this shit. It's the first one of the Black female author, artist, and hero. Come into the booth, read this shit. It's diversity. You love that shit. And they go, okay. And then I pitch them the story and they go, well, the story actually sounds pretty good. I'm like, right? So I thoroughly enjoy converting new racists out there.
And there's a lot. Y'all, we at church right now, and I would spend another hour talking about the expectations of Black media in the fandom. But Serena, I think the thesis is right on the nail. A lot of people don't read it or watch it and then criticize it before doing it. And I think that's where the biggest thing comes from. And Seb, I agree with you there too. I think people also don't know that you can like two things, right? Like, I'm a big Harry Potter person, but I also really like TJ and Orishas. Like, you could like two different types of fantasies. J.K. Rowling is not going to pull up in your crib and start beating you because you read something else. But I agree. I know this is very sad, but we only have 10 minutes. So I'm going to move on to some of the Q&A. We have 3 questions. So if you guys could keep it brief because we only have 10 minutes left. I'm going to start with Yetide. The first question is if you could speak on your experiences narrating audiobooks for Natasha Bowen's Mermaids and the Orisha books. What was it like literally giving a voice to that universe?
That is such a great question. Black mermaids. I mean, that was it. I was already in, and it was so funny. I'd had this. Okay, now I'm going maybe kind of off topic, but I'd had this dream just a week before of this mermaid that kind of reminded me of Yemoja, and this book came to me. And usually I try and read a little bit of something that's brought in. And then, get an idea of it when I have to move on to something else. But this was one of those that I started reading it. I couldn't put it down. I just had to keep going. The characters were so engaging, the quests, the stories, the way that it mixed into African folklore. It was just, if y'all haven't gotten a chance yet, I'm trying not to ruin any of the plot points. But Natasha just created such a beautiful world. I mean, she knows. I immediately said, is this going to be a movie? Is this going to be television? This is, this is a world that I think people really interested in seeing. And this was before we even got to see, what's going to happen with Little Mermaid right now. So it was an incredible experience. It is something that I definitely recommend to everyone if you haven't had a chance to. And I'm imagining, it is a YA novel, and imagining all those young Black girls. We've spoken to this experience of not being able to see ourselves in these worlds. And here she is, the hero of the story, and she's a mermaid and she's Black.
Love that. So the next question we have is from Rod Faulkner, who, if you guys don't know, is also big in sci-fi too. I can't believe he's on the panel. But this question is going to the entire panel. Do you think we're facing a backlash from mainstream media due to the CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery stating that they want to focus on Middle America and the cancellation of series like Kindred, Lovecraft Country, as well as racist responses from the fandom due to more on-screen Black and POC representation? So I think I'm paraphrasing here, but it sounds like he's asking, do you think with us actually making change, are you receiving more backlash?
I think anytime there is significant change that's happening, those in power may feel uneasy. I think it's just, when there's a changing of the guard, there's also a fight to keep things status quo. But I will also say, I think the time that we're living in right now for POCs to have their work and their art and their stories to come to light, I think the time is now. I think, beyond just the big wigs of the studios and the networks, there's the internet, and you can do and put anything on the internet and create anything for directly to the audiences. So I think anytime there's a major change, there's going to be a fight to keep things as it is,
Yeah.
So.
And I'll just jump on that too. I think, why are you writing your story? Are you writing your story to make it as a big movie, TV show, or are you writing the story because the story needs to be written? And how long do you wait for someone else to write your story? So you go, oh, that's something similar, I imagine. So you write your own story, not because that is a sudden, what I was saying earlier, that's the current time right now. Hey, it was hip to do, after Black Panther, like, oh, let's gobble up as many of this, that, and the others as we can. Oh, there's a backlash from all the wacky racists out there. Okay, I guess we're doing the Middle America for a bit until something else happens. So don't wait for that trend. Timely is always timely, but be timeless. Create your own reality. Write your own story because it needs to be written. You can't fall to the whims of this, that, and the other.
Yeah. It's crazy that they call something doing well it now being hit, right? Like, this Black property did incredible, we want more. And people are like, wow, this is pandering. Like, what? Like, no, people like this. This is what we're adding on to. We are at time, everyone. There were a couple more questions, but there's no way we can do it in time. I wanted to take the time to thank every single panel member here. This has been an incredible experience. I can't wait to call my poppy after and tell him that I was on this panel because he's asleep. But thank you all for joining. Thank you everyone who joined the panel as well. Be sure to hit the floor. There are a lot of sci-fi and fantasies that are on the floor right now at Virtuous Cons that you can cop. Some that I recommended, if you guys follow me and you're looking for a lot of the books I've been discussing this month, they're all here at Virtual Con, so definitely pick it up. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem.